Good morning. It's August 7th, 2023. Wall Street Journal's daily newsletter. What would Milton say? The Wall Street Journal's editorial board has spent the last few months trying to boost Governor Ron DeSantis' presidential campaign. It calls his legislative record as, quote, as impressive as you will find, while touting Florida's population growth and noting that the state's age-adjusted COVID death is well below the national average. As DeSantis' campaign has sagged, the Journal's editorialists have offered him tactical advice for confronting Donald Trump. After DeSantis released his economic plan last week, the Journal took a different tone. Its headline called the plan unstable. The editorial praised some parts of DeSantis' agenda while criticizing him for favoring less trade with China, less immigration, and federal action to ease student debt. Even if the DeSantis campaign ends with a whimper, this argument among American conservatives is an important one. It will shape the Republican Party in the post-Trump era, however far away that may be, and by extension, influence the country's economic policy. Today's newsletter explains the debate. A Republican split. The Journal editorial page represents an outlook that dominated the Republican Party from Ronald Reagan's presidency in the 1980s until Trump's arrival in 2016. It favors an approach that variously described as laissez-faire, small government, and neoliberal. It includes light regulation, low taxes, cuts to government benefits, and high levels of trade and immigration. Its patron saint is Milton Friedman, who argued that free market capitalism is the best way to lift living standards. The problem for the laissez-faire advocates is that many of their predictions have not come true. What? Income growth for most Americans has been sluggish since the Reagan Revolution. Only the affluent have enjoyed healthy gains in income and wealth. Other measures of living standards look even worse. In 1980, life expectancy in the U.S. was typical for an industrialized country. Today, it is lower than in Canada, Australia, Japan, South Korea, or any large country in Western Europe. Gee, I wonder if it's all the food that we eat. Some laissez-faire advocates claim that these statistics are all misleading and that the past several decades have, in fact, been a glorious period of prosperity. But more Americans disagree, polls show. Even many Republican voters disagree. This dissatisfaction created the opening for Trump to take over the Republican Party while calling for less trade and immigration and promising to protect Medicare and Social Security. His campaign was a sharp departure from the proposals of laissez-faire Republicans like Paul Ryan. Each of the Republicans who hopes to lead the party after Trump faces a choice on economic populism, return to Reagan's neoliberalism, or try to create a more coherent version of Trump's populism. A few, including Nikki Haley, have opted for Reaganism. Most high-profile younger Republican leaders have not. Josh Hawley, Marco Rubio, and J.D. Vance are among the Republican senators who have called for trade restrictions or other government actions to lift incomes, as I've noted before. DeSantis is a telling case study because his national record was thin enough that he could choose a path that he would like to take. And he did not choose Reaganism. He has embraced some parts of it, like low taxes, less bureaucracy, and school choice. But in the first item on his agenda is decidedly different. He has called for trade restrictions with China and the end of its most favored nation status. He rejects a core plank of the old republicanism. We are a nation with an economy, not the other way around, DeSantis said last week. On immigration, he has called for restrictions to protect wages and reduce the flow of fentanyl, and offered an explanation that sounds like a Bernie Sanders line. Quote, the American immigration system will serve Americans, not multinational corporate elites, end quote. On student debt, DeSantis supports a middle ground between the status quo and Biden's attempts at cancellation, helping borrowers to discharge debt through the bankruptcy process and holding colleges responsible for unpaid loans. Quote, it's really notable that when he decided what was that the pro-Trump Republican orthodoxy was not of interest to him, said Orrin Cass, a former aide to Mitt Romney and the founder of a reformist conservative think tank called American Compass. He sees a need to go in a new direction. He thinks that's what's politically sellable in the GOP. Latent factions. I don't want to exaggerate the shift. Republicans like DeSantis, Rubio, and Trump continue to support tax cuts for the wealthy and most deregulation. The Supreme Court is dominated by Reagan-style laissez-faire jurists. The Republican Party is still mostly the party of big business. Really? So the five largest corporations are Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Google, and Microsoft. They all lean hard left. The Republicans are big business? Really? In the short term, these economics issues are also not the central ones for our political system. The central issue is whether the anti-democratic forces within the Republican Party, led by Trump, again take control of the federal government. DeSantis himself has shown some authoritarian tendencies, such as bullying skeptics and whitewashing history. Okay. Still, the split over the Republican economic agenda matters. Already, it helps explain why Biden was able to attract Republican support for legislation to improve the country's infrastructure and expand its semiconductor industry. Quote, on the surface, American politics is deeply calcified, stuck, and hyperpolarized, end quote. Lee Drutman, a political scientist, wrote in his Substack newsletter last week. Quote, below the surface, American politics is rich with latent factions and repressed diversity. Repressed diversity, that's an interesting phrase. I'm going to have to look into that. So looking at some headlines now. At barbecues, fairs, and weddings, DeSantis is wooing Iowa voters. Kamala Harris has taken on a more visible role in the 2024 campaign. She has sparred with DeSantis and defended abortion rights in Iowa. Nevada, a swing state that has the country's highest unemployment rate, its economy has struggled to recover after the pandemic. Unemployment, there's a good topic to discuss right there. I'm going to go into this right now. So unemployment, it's really great, they say. And let's take a look at those numbers right now. So here's the number that they broadcast here. It's that red line. So this is the official U3 unemployment measure. And as you can see, it's, what is it? A little under 4%. Sounds great, right? The problem is that we stopped counting people who were not looking for work. That's what this broadcast U6 line right here, this gray line is. That's the people that are short-term unemployed. And also people that have worked, that want to work full-time but are working part-time. So that number, and that's the broadcast, so that's the 1990s based measure. So under that, we'd be at, 7.5%, 6%, something like that, 6.7. So if we use the old measure, which they got rid of in 94, got rid of everybody that gave up on finding a job out of the workforce for over a year, they just stopped counting them because apparently they don't matter anymore. Well, if we counted that, this is the real unemployment number, somewhere right around here, which is 24.6%. So that's great. That's what our real unemployment is. So anytime you hear them talking about unemployment, just remember they're not counting people that gave up working or are working part-time when they want to work full-time. So back to the Times. In international news, quote, it's a marathon. The Times spent 2 weeks with Ukrainian troops to understand how and where the slow counteroffensive is going. Well, it was supposed to be done and over with by now. They were supposed to have recaptured ground, but the Russians keep gaining territory, so maybe we're just putting a lot of spin on this. A deadline passed for Niger's military junta to reinstate the ousted president or face military action from other West African nations. There's no sign of intervention so far. What exactly do you think the other West African nations are going to do to Niger? They have a much more competent military than a lot of those surrounding ones do. There's nothing they can do. A train derailed in Pakistan, killing at least 30. That's awful. In China, the U.S. is importing fewer goods from China, and Mexico is now the U.S.'s top trading partner. That's a good thing. An American tech mogul is spreading Chinese propaganda around the world, mixing progressive advocacy with Beijing's talking points. That's great. Climate. A group of older Swiss women say the country has violated their rights by failing to curb emissions. That should be fun. Fire and floods. The climate crisis is changing how we think about summer. Well, it's changing how you talk about it. You use climate alarmist rhetoric to terrify people, but summer's always been hot. Boy Scouts are leaving the World Scout Jamboree campsite in South Korea early because of a typhoon. Why is that a story? A lawyer for Trump went on television and said his actions weren't crime. They were, quote, aspirational. State troopers in Texas are clashing with local police in Austin, the progressive capital. That's not shocking. Austin is an interesting place. The federal government's decision to keep Space Command headquarters in Colorado Springs has frustrated residents of Huntsville, Alabama. Some feel they're being punished for their conservatism. A woman was falsely accused of robbery and carjacking after facial recognition match and was arrested while 8 months pregnant. That's fun. Highlights one of the many issues with facial recognition is that you are not going to always have correct matches. And that is one of the reasons why I'm wholly opposed to using facial recognition. Is imagine how many people are going to have that happen to them as we roll this out. Yellow, the trucking firm that received a $700 million pandemic bailout, filed for bankruptcy. That's part of our great economy right now. One of the largest trucking companies that exists that delivers freight all over this country is shutting down because our economy is doing so great. Let's skip the opinion section. Hank the Tank, a black bear responsible for at least 21 home break-ins near Lake Tahoe, has been captured. I bet that's got some fun video. A travel scam. If you're looking for a guidebook for an upcoming trip, who does that? Beware of the fakes. Shoddy travel books that appear to be compiled with the help of artificial intelligence have flooded Amazon in recent months. Again, who's buying travel books from Amazon? Fake reviews recommend the self-published books, bringing some near the top of the search results. That's a story? Why is that a story? More on culture. Barbie reached $1 billion in global box office sales. Chinese moviegoers are loving it. Yeah, they're not so much in America, though. Sound of Freedom's doing great, huh? No mention of that. Taylor Swift's Eras Tour is finishing its initial North American leg with shows near Los Angeles. That looks great, doesn't it? That's a good place to end it, right there, with that image. Yeah.